Clara Bennett had crossed nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she knew only through 6 carefully written letters. By the time the wagon carrying her from Red Creek disappeared behind a ridge of yellow grass, she had begun to wonder whether that fact made her brave or foolish. Perhaps both. The Wyoming evening stretched endlessly around her, all copper light and wind-bent prairie, with mountains rising blue-gray in the distance. Clara stood beside a single weathered suitcase and watched the driver grow smaller until there was nothing left but dust. He had pointed toward a narrow trail winding between 2 low hills. Cole Place is half a mile that way. Clara had checked the final letter again. North Road beyond Red Creek, past the split cottonwood, cabin near the western ridge. It matched, almost perfectly. She smoothed the front of her dark blue traveling dress, lifted the suitcase with both hands, and started walking. Thomas Whitaker had described his ranch as modest but prosperous. He owned cattle, 20 good acres near a creek, and a cabin he intended to enlarge once he had a wife. His letters had been practical rather than romantic. Clara had appreciated that. At 28, she no longer trusted men who decorated promises with beautiful words. Thomas had written about winter feed, fencing, the price of flour, and what he expected from marriage. He wanted a woman capable of keeping a household. Clara wanted a place where she was useful. It seemed enough, or it had seemed enough in Illinois, where she had been living in her married sister's crowded home and sewing dresses for women who complained about hems, while Clara wondered how many more years she could remain a guest in someone else's life. Then Thomas Whitaker's advertisement had appeared in the newspaper. Rancher, 35, respectable, financially secure, seeks practical woman of good character for marriage. 6 letters later, Clara had sold most of what she owned and boarded a train west. With every step toward the distant cabin, the decision felt heavier. She reached the porch just as the sun touched the mountains. The house was smaller than she expected. A log cabin with a stone chimney, 2 narrow windows, and a roof that had been patched in 3 different places. A barn stood farther down the slope beside a fenced corral containing 4 horses. Not prosperous, but well kept. Clara set down her suitcase. Her heart began pounding. She had imagined this moment dozens of times. Thomas opening the door. A polite handshake. Perhaps awkward silence. Perhaps relief. She raised her hand and knocked. Nothing. She waited, then heard heavy footsteps. The door opened. The man standing there was not the man from Thomas Whitaker's photograph. Clara knew that immediately. This stranger was taller, broad-shouldered, though lean in the way of someone who worked more than he ate. Dark brown hair fell untidily across his forehead, and several days of beard shadowed a face, weathered by sun and wind. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows. One hand still held a small hammer. He looked at Clara, then at her suitcase, then back at Clara. Neither spoke. Finally, she forced a smile. "Mr. Whitaker?" The man's expression changed. Not dramatically, only enough that Clara felt the first cold thread of fear move through her stomach. "No, ma'am." She stared at him. "I was told this was the Whitaker Ranch." It was. The wind moved between them. Clara tightened her fingers around the handle of her handbag. "Was?" The stranger placed the hammer on a small table inside the doorway. "My name's Nathan Cole." Clara said nothing. "I bought this property from Thomas Whitaker 6 months ago." For several seconds, she thought she must have misunderstood him. That isn't possible. Nathan's eyes shifted toward the envelope she was holding. Clara looked down. Only then did she realize she had taken Thomas's final letter from her bag without thinking. Nathan nodded toward it. "You looking for him?" Clara swallowed. "I'm Clara Bennett." The name clearly meant nothing to him. She hated that. She opened the letter with trembling fingers and removed a folded sheet, followed by the small photograph Thomas had sent. "This is Thomas Whitaker." Nathan looked at the photograph. His jaw tightened. "Yes." Clara's breathing became shallow. "He told me to come here." Nathan slowly raised his eyes. "Why?" There were moments in life when humiliation came so quickly that dignity had no time to defend itself. Clara had imagined introducing herself to her future husband. She had never imagined explaining herself to a complete stranger standing in that husband's doorway. She lifted her chin. Because I was supposed to marry him. Nathan Cole became perfectly still. Somewhere behind the cabin, a horse struck a hoof against a wooden rail. Clara reached into her handbag and removed another folded paper, a certificate from the matrimonial agency. Thomas Whitaker's signed agreement. Her own signature beneath it. Nathan read enough to understand. Then he looked past Clara toward the empty trail. How'd you get here? A wagon from Red Creek. When's it coming back? It isn't. Nathan's gaze moved toward the western horizon. The sun had almost disappeared. Clara followed his eyes. The trail behind her was already filling with shadow. She suddenly understood how completely alone she was. Do you know where Mr. Whitaker lives now? Nathan did not answer immediately, and Clara knew before he spoke that she would not like what came next. He doesn't live anywhere near here. Her throat tightened. Where did he go? California, according to the man who bought his cattle. Clara stared at him. California? He left 3 days after selling me this place. That was 6 months ago. Yes. Clara looked down at the letter in her hand. The paper had arrived 11 days earlier. Thomas had written it months after leaving Wyoming. She read one line again. When you arrive, come directly to the ranch. I will be waiting for you. A lie. Every word suddenly looked like a lie. Nathan watched her face. You said he sent that recently? Clara folded the letter. Yes. Nathan exhaled slowly. For the first time, something like anger crossed his expression. Not toward her, toward Thomas. Clara bent to pick up her suitcase. I'm sorry to have disturbed you. Nathan frowned. Where are you going? Back to town. It's 6 miles. I walked farther than that as a girl. In daylight, maybe. Clara straightened. I'll manage. Nathan stepped onto the porch and looked toward the north. Storm coming. The sky there had turned the color of gunmetal. Clara saw it now. A low wall of clouds spreading across the plains. I can't stay here. I didn't say you were staying. The words stung more than they should have. Nathan seemed to realize it. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. I mean, I don't know you. Of course. And you don't know me. No. Another gust of wind swept across the ranch. Clara's hat ribbon snapped against her cheek. Nathan looked again at the darkening trail. Then at her thin traveling coat. He seemed to argue silently with himself. Finally, he reached for her suitcase. Clara pulled it back instinctively. What are you doing? Taking that inside. I thought you said, you're not walking 6 miles in a thunderstorm. I can't impose. You can argue tomorrow. A distant rumble rolled across the prairie. Nathan opened the door wider. Clara remained where she was. Everything sensible in her warned against entering a strange man's cabin. Everything else reminded her that darkness was coming. Thomas Whitaker was gone, and she had exactly $6.40 left in her purse. Nathan waited. He did not reach for her again. Did not smile. Did not make promises. He simply stood beside the open doorway. One night, Clara said. Nathan nodded. One night. She stepped inside. Neither of them knew that she would still be there when the first snow fell. Nathan Cole's cabin was cleaner than Clara expected. Not comfortable. Not warm in the way a home became warm after years of ordinary living. But clean. A cast-iron stove stood against one wall. 2 wooden chairs faced a scarred table. A narrow shelf held tin plates, coffee, flour, and a row of carefully folded cloths. Near the fireplace stood a single armchair with one broken rung beneath it. There were no curtains. No photographs, no embroidered cushions, nothing that suggested another person had ever belonged there. Nathan carried Clara's suitcase to the corner beside the stove. You can have the bedroom. Clara glanced toward the only closed door. And where will you sleep? Barn. Her eyebrows rose. I'm not forcing you out of your own house. You're not. You just said you'd sleep in the barn. I sleep there sometimes anyway. Clara doubted that. Nathan avoided her eyes and began gathering a bedroll from a wooden chest. I can take the chair. No. The floor, then. No. You are remarkably stubborn, Mr. Cole. He looked at her. So I've been told. That almost sounded like humor. Almost. Then thunder shook the cabin hard enough to make the tin cups on the shelf tremble. Rain struck the roof seconds later. Not gently. It came in sheets, hammering against the windows and turning the dusty yard outside into darkness. Clara stood near the stove, listening. If Nathan had allowed her to leave, she would have been somewhere on that road now. The thought made her hands cold. He placed another piece of wood in the stove. You hungry? I'm fine. Her stomach betrayed her with a quiet growl. Nathan glanced at her. Clara closed her eyes briefly. I haven't eaten since morning. That's not the same as fine. He opened a cupboard. What emerged was hardly a feast. A heel of bread, dried beans, 2 pieces of salt pork. Nathan put them on the table. I was planning to eat beans. Clara looked at the ingredients. You were planning to burn beans. He turned slowly. I know how to cook. Do you? Yes. She glanced at the blackened pot hanging beside the stove. Nathan followed her gaze. That happened once. Of course. For the first time since arriving, Clara almost smiled. It surprised her enough that she quickly looked away. May I? Nathan hesitated, then stepped aside. Clara removed her traveling gloves and rolled back her sleeves. She had spent years helping her mother stretch poor meals into respectable ones. Salt pork and beans were hardly difficult. Within minutes, she had sliced the meat, found an onion Nathan had forgotten in a basket beneath the shelf, and started a small pan over the stove. Nathan stood awkwardly nearby. You don't have to do that. I know. You're a guest. I'm a stranger occupying your bedroom. That too. Then let me earn my supper. Something in Nathan's expression changed. Clara noticed it, but could not identify why. She continued cooking. Outside, lightning flashed across the windows. Inside, the scent of browned onion and pork slowly filled the cabin. Nathan sat at the table and watched her work. After several minutes, he spoke. Those letters. Clara's hands stopped. What about them? Did Whitaker ask you for money? Her shoulders tightened. No. Nathan nodded once. Good. Why? Because he owed plenty of it. Clara turned around. He told me the ranch was profitable. He lied. The words landed heavily. Nathan seemed unwilling to soften them. He owed the bank, feed supplier, 2 cattle buyers, probably half the saloon. Clara looked toward her handbag. 6 letters, 6 carefully composed pieces of paper. She had read them so many times, she nearly knew each line by memory. Thomas had written that he was financially secure, that he simply lacked companionship, that a decent woman would have a safe future beside him. What kind of man sells his ranch? Clara whispered, then continues writing to a woman as though he still owns it. Nathan stared into the stove, one who expects never to face her. Clara hated how much sense that made. The food began to hiss in the pan. She turned back quickly. Nathan said nothing else until they sat down to eat. He tasted the beans, then took another bite. Clara watched him. Well? Nathan kept eating. You were right. About? My beans. She smiled despite herself. They're terrible? Usually. The storm continued outside. For 10 quiet minutes, they ate like 2 people who had known each other far longer than an hour. Then Clara noticed something strange. There was only 1 plate of meat between them. Nathan had taken almost none. You're giving me your portion. No. You have 1 piece. I'm not hungry. She raised an eyebrow. Nathan sighed and took another slice. Clara looked down at her plate. Kindness from strangers was dangerous. It created debts, expectations, hope. She had learned that lesson before. Tomorrow, she said, I'll return to Red Creek. Nathan's fork stopped. There's a boarding house near the depot? Yes. Know what it costs? No. $1 a night. Clara's fingers tightened beneath the table. Nathan noticed. How much money do you have? That's hardly your concern. I'm not trying to rob you. I know. Then? She considered lying. Instead, she said quietly, $6.40. Nathan looked toward the storm-black window. And a ticket home? No. Silence filled the room. For the first time since she had stepped from the wagon, Clara felt the full weight of her situation. $6. No husband. No job. No family within 2,000 miles. Nathan leaned back. You worked before coming here? I sewed. Professionally? Yes. You cook. That is not normally considered a profession. Around here it should be. She almost smiled again. Then Nathan said, I might know someone in Red Creek who needs help. Hope came so quickly that Clara hated herself for feeling it. Who? Mrs. Dalton. Runs the boarding house. Her sister broke her wrist last month. Do you think she would hire me? Maybe. Nathan looked toward the roof as thunder rolled overhead. If the creek doesn't flood, I can take you into town tomorrow. If? This storm's hitting the North Ridge. Clara remembered the narrow wooden bridge the wagon had crossed earlier. Nathan saw the realization on her face. If the water rises too high, he said, road could be closed a few days. A few days? Could be. Clara stared into the fire. One night. That had been the agreement. Yet the storm outside seemed determined to make agreements irrelevant. Later, Nathan carried his bedroll toward the door. Clara stopped him. You're really sleeping in the barn? Yes. There's lightning. The barn has a roof. So does this house. He opened the door. Cold rain sprayed across the threshold. Clara folded her arms. This is absurd. Nathan looked back at her. You said you don't know me. I don't. Then you ought to be able to lock the door. The humor disappeared from her face. She suddenly understood. He was not sleeping outside because he needed space. He was doing it so she could feel safe. Nathan stepped into the rain. Bolt it behind me. Clara watched him cross the yard toward the barn, shoulders bent against the storm. Then she closed the door. And locked it. But long after she climbed into his narrow bed, she remained awake, listening to the thunder, and thinking about the stranger who had surrendered his own house because another man had lied to her. Clara woke to silence. For a few disoriented seconds, she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough timber. Rainwater tapped softly from the eaves outside. A gray morning pressed against the small bedroom window. Then she remembered. Thomas. The wrong ranch. Nathan Cole. The storm. Clara sat up quickly. She was still wearing her shift beneath the blankets, and her traveling dress hung carefully over the back of a chair where she had left it the night before. The room itself told her almost nothing about Nathan. A narrow bed, one wooden dresser, a wash basin, 2 shirts hanging from pegs, a worn Bible beside the lamp. No photographs, no letters, no keepsakes. It was the bedroom of a man who appeared determined to leave as little evidence of himself as possible. Clara dressed quickly and stepped into the main room. Nathan was already there. He stood beside the stove with wet boots, damp hair, and mud reaching nearly to his knees. Clara stopped. I thought you were in the barn. Was. He poured coffee into a tin cup. You went somewhere? Creek. Something in his tone made her stomach tighten. And. Nathan handed her the cup. Bridge is gone. Clara stared at him. Gone? Mostly. How does a bridge become mostly gone? Half of it's downstream. She set the coffee down untouched. How long before it can be crossed? Nathan removed his coat and hung it beside the door. On horseback? Maybe tomorrow if the water drops. And with a wagon? 3 or 4 days. Clara's jaw tightened. Nathan added, could be longer. She turned toward the window. The ranch yard looked entirely different after the storm. Mud covered the path. The creek beyond the pasture had swollen into a wide brown ribbon, and one section of fence had collapsed beneath the rushing water. 3 or 4 days, perhaps longer. She had known Nathan for less than 12 hours. Now she was trapped on his ranch. I can pay you. Nathan looked over. For what? For staying. No. I have money. You have $6. And 40 cents. That 40 cents changes everything. Clara gave him a look. Nathan's mouth twitched. It was the first time she had seen him come close to smiling. She looked away before he noticed that she had noticed. "I won't live here as charity. You're not living here. I am sleeping in your bed and eating your food. For a few days." That still cost something. Nathan leaned one hip against the table. "You always argue this much?" "Yes." "Good to know. I'm serious." "So am I." Clara folded her arms. "Then give me work." Nathan's expression shifted. "Work? I can cook, clean, mend clothing, keep accounts if your handwriting is readable." "It is." That sounded defensive. Nathan ignored it. "I don't need a housekeeper." Clara looked around. Dust lay across the windowsill. A stack of unwashed cups sat beside the basin. One cabinet door hung crooked on a single hinge. She raised an eyebrow. Nathan followed her gaze. "I manage." "Yes." Heroically. This time he did smile. Barely. But unmistakably. The change startled her. For one instant, Nathan Cole looked several years younger. Then he seemed to remember himself, and reached for his hat. Fence came down near the south pasture. "I need to move the cattle." Clara stepped toward the stove. "And breakfast?" "Coffee." "That is not breakfast." "It has been for years." "That explains a great deal." Nathan turned. "What does that mean?" "Nothing flattering." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You really crossed half the country to marry Whitaker?" The question stripped the humor from the room. Clara looked down. "Yes." "Why?" She heard no judgment in the question. That somehow made it harder to answer. Clara picked up the coffee again and wrapped both hands around the cup. "My parents died within 2 years of each other." Nathan waited. "My sister married. She has 3 children. Her husband is a decent man, but their house is small." "You were living with them." "For 4 years." "Did they want you gone?" "No." Clara hesitated. That was almost worse. Nathan frowned. She continued. "They were kind. They never asked me to leave. But every meal I ate belonged to someone else. Every room I slept in was needed by someone else. Every Christmas, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, I was the extra chair at the table." Nathan looked toward the window. Clara could not tell whether he understood. She suspected he did. "So when I saw Thomas's advertisement," she said, "I thought perhaps being needed would be better than being welcome." Nathan's eyes returned to hers. The words hung between them. Clara wished she could take them back. They felt too personal for a man whose surname she had learned only the night before. Nathan reached for the door. "Make breakfast if you want." Clara blinked. "I thought you weren't hungry." "I changed my mind." He stepped outside. Clara stared after him. It was not until several seconds later that she realized he had given her exactly what she had asked for, something useful to do. By the time Nathan returned, the cabin smelled of biscuits. He entered carrying an armful of split wood and stopped dead. Clara had cleaned the table, washed the cups, swept the floor, and somehow found enough flour, lard, and baking powder to produce 6 uneven but respectable biscuits. Nathan set down the wood. "You didn't have to clean." "I know. That cabinet's been crooked for 2 years." "I noticed." "You notice everything?" "Most things." Nathan looked suspiciously toward the shelf. "You reorganized my coffee." "Your coffee was sitting beside horse liniment." "I knew which was which." "I'm relieved." He sat down. Clara placed a plate in front of him. Nathan broke open a biscuit. Steam curled from the center. He took one bite, then another. Clara sat across from him. "You can criticize them." "I wasn't planning to." They rose unevenly. "They're biscuits, not architecture." She laughed. The sound escaped before she could stop it. Nathan looked at her. Clara immediately lowered her eyes. It felt strange to laugh here. Wrong, almost. She had spent the previous day discovering that the future she had gambled everything on did not exist. She should have been devastated. Instead, she was eating biscuits with a stranger, while sunlight slowly returned to the prairie. That realization frightened her more than she expected. Nathan finished 2 biscuits before speaking again. I'll ride into town once the crossing's safe. To speak with Mrs. Dalton? Yes. Thank you. He nodded. Clara hesitated. What if she doesn't need anyone? Nathan reached for another biscuit. We'll find something else. The word struck her. We. He appeared not to notice. Clara did. Later that morning, Nathan worked near the barn repairing a section of broken fence. Clara sat on the porch with his torn work shirt in her lap. She had found it hanging from a nail, ripped nearly from shoulder to elbow. The tear was old. Instead of throwing it away, Nathan had continued wearing it beneath his coat. Clara threaded a needle. The wind carried the smell of wet earth across the ranch. Nathan was perhaps 50 yards away, driving a new post into the ground. He worked with deliberate efficiency. No wasted movement. No shouting at the horses. No impatience when the post refused to sit straight. There was something deeply quiet about him. Not shy. Controlled. As though silence was something he had built around himself. Clara lowered her eyes to the shirt. She had known men who filled rooms with words. Thomas Whitaker had filled 6 letters with them. Nathan had offered very few. Yet one of them had traveled to California after inviting her west. The other had slept in a barn to make certain she could lock her door. She pulled the thread tighter. Comparison was dangerous. Nathan had not asked for a bride. She was not one. She was simply waiting for a bridge to reopen. By afternoon, the sky had cleared. Nathan came toward the porch carrying a broken bridle. He noticed the shirt immediately. You fixed that? Yes. I was going to. When? He glanced toward the mountains. Eventually. Clara held it out. He took the shirt and inspected the stitching. You're good. I told you I sewed professionally. You said dresses. Fabric does not become more complicated simply because a man wears it. Nathan looked at her. That sounded insulting. It was educational. He sat on the porch step. Clara picked up the bridle. This needs stitching too. You repair leather? No. Then maybe let me keep one useful skill. She handed it back. Nathan began working. For several minutes, neither spoke. The prairie spread before them, washed clean by the storm. Then Clara noticed a horse standing alone near the far fence. A chestnut mare, smaller than Nathan's other horses. She's beautiful. Nathan followed her gaze. Rose. Yours? All of them are mine. You know what I mean. He returned his attention to the bridle. She belonged to my wife. Clara went still. Nathan's hands stopped. It was the first time he had mentioned a wife. I didn't know you were married. I'm not. The answer came quietly. Clara understood. I'm sorry. Nathan nodded. How long? 7 years. 7 years. The same number of years he had avoided letting another woman into his life, if Clara had understood his guarded manner correctly. She looked toward Rose again. The mare grazed peacefully beneath the afternoon sun. What was her name? Nathan stared down at the leather strap. Emily. He said it as though the name still had weight. Clara did not ask how she died. Nathan did not offer. After another long silence, he stood. Waters dropping. Clara looked toward the creek. So tomorrow? Maybe. She should have felt relieved. Instead, something unexpectedly heavy settled behind her ribs. Tomorrow meant town. Town meant Mrs. Dalton. A room at the boarding house. A job, if she was fortunate. It meant beginning the life she should have been planning all along. Away from Nathan Cole. Clara rose. That's good. Nathan looked at her. Yes. Neither sounded convinced. That evening, Clara prepared stew. Nathan repaired the cabinet hinge. They ate without discussing the creek. After supper, Clara washed the dishes while Nathan read beside the lamp. The arrangement felt disturbingly natural. She caught herself imagining another evening exactly like it. Then another. She forced the thought away. Before bed, Nathan gathered his blanket. You don't have to sleep in the barn again. The words left Clara's mouth before she had decided to say them. Nathan looked up. She felt heat rise into her cheeks. I mean, the floor is large enough, and I can lock the bedroom door. Nathan considered it. No. Mr. Cole. Nathan. Clara stopped. He looked almost uncomfortable. If you're going to keep repairing my clothes and insulting my cooking, seems foolish to keep calling me Mr. Cole. A small smile touched her mouth. Very well. She hesitated. Nathan. Something subtle passed through his expression when she said his name. Then he picked up his bedroll. Good night, Clara. It was the first time he had used hers. She watched him leave. The door closed behind him. And for reasons she could not explain, the cabin seemed much emptier than it had the night before. The next morning, Nathan rode to the creek before sunrise. He returned less than an hour later. Clara was standing beside the stove when he entered. She immediately read the answer in his face. The bridge? Still out. How long now? Nathan removed his hat. County crew won't reach it before Monday. Clara stared at him. It was Thursday. 4 more days. At least. Neither spoke. Then Nathan glanced toward the fresh biscuits cooling beside the stove. Clara looked at the shirt she had begun mending on the table. 4 more days. She should have been horrified. Instead, beneath all the uncertainty and embarrassment, Clara felt something she did not want to name. Relief. 4 days should not have been enough time to become accustomed to another person. Clara discovered that they were. By Friday morning, she knew Nathan rose before the first light touched the eastern ridge. She knew he drank his coffee black, preferred the crust of the bread, and always checked the horses before eating. She knew he left his gloves on the table no matter how many times she placed them beside the door. And Nathan, though he never admitted it, had apparently learned things about her too. When Clara entered the kitchen that morning, a fresh bucket of water was already waiting beside the stove. Yesterday she had struggled to carry one from the well. She looked toward Nathan. He was standing near the door fastening his coat. You brought that in? Yes. I could have done it. I know. You said I needed work. You still have work. Clara glanced around the cabin. What? Nathan pointed toward the stove. Preventing breakfast from becoming mine. She smiled. An important responsibility. Possibly the most important one on the ranch. He opened the door, then paused. I'll be back before noon. Where are you going? North pasture. She looked outside. The sky was clear, but frost covered the grass. You'll eat before you go. Nathan sighed. Clara, sit. He stared at her. She pointed toward the table. Nathan Cole, who looked capable of wrestling an angry steer into submission, quietly removed his hat and sat down. Clara turned away before he could see her smile. It was becoming dangerously easy to imagine she belonged here. That thought followed her throughout the morning. She cleaned the bedroom, washed 2 shirts, repaired a tear in Nathan's winter coat, and reorganized a small drawer filled with receipts. That last task revealed something unexpected. Nathan kept meticulous records: feed purchases, cattle sales, property taxes, veterinary expenses. Every figure had been written in careful columns. Clara sat at the table examining them. The ranch was not wealthy. Thomas Whitaker had lied about that too. But under Nathan, it was stable. More stable than it had been before he purchased it. She found old account pages in Thomas's handwriting beneath Nathan's newer ones. Debts, late payments, missing figures. Nathan had spent 6 months repairing more than fences. Clara was still studying the ledger when she heard a horse approaching. She closed it immediately. Nathan entered carrying his saddlebag. Sorry. For what? I was looking for thread and found your accounts. He set the saddlebag down. Nothing secret in there. I shouldn't have read them. Nathan glanced at the open ledger. You understand accounts. My father owned a dry goods shop. You kept his books? For 9 years. Nathan pulled off his gloves. You see anything wrong? Clara looked at him. With your records? Yes. You actually want me to say? I asked. She reopened the ledger. You are paying too much for winter grain. Nathan frowned. I buy from Mercer. Mercer charges you 12 cents more per sack than Whitaker paid 2 years ago. Prices went up. Not that much. Nathan came closer. Clara turned another page. And you're buying small quantities every 3 weeks. Don't have storage. You have an empty section in the west barn. It leaks. Then repair the roof. Nathan looked at her. Clara realized she had just instructed a rancher she had known for 3 days how to operate his property. She slowly closed the book. My apologies. 4. That was presumptuous. Nathan pulled out the chair beside her. Keep going. Clara blinked. You're serious? If I didn't want your opinion, I wouldn't have asked. She opened the ledger again. If the barn were repaired and you bought grain before winter prices rise, you could probably save $70 or $80. Nathan leaned over the numbers. Clara became suddenly aware of how close he was. His shoulder almost touched hers. She could smell cold air, leather, and wood smoke on his coat. She shifted slightly. Nathan noticed. He moved back at once. Sorry. No, it's fine. The silence that followed felt different from their earlier silences. Clara concentrated on the ledger. Nathan concentrated very hard on the opposite wall. Finally he said, $80? Approximately. That's a lot of money. Yes. He looked again at the accounts. You really did this for 9 years? Until father died. And afterward? My brother-in-law sold the shop. You didn't want it? Clara laughed softly. I wanted it very much. Nathan frowned. Then why didn't you keep it? Because the bank would not extend credit to an unmarried woman without a male guarantor. His expression hardened. That's foolish. That was also my opinion. What happened to the money from the sale? Debts took most of it. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. So you lost your parents, your home, and your work. Clara lowered her eyes. When you summarize it that way, it sounds rather unfortunate. And then Whitaker. Yes. Nathan's jaw tightened. For some reason, his anger on her behalf made Clara more uncomfortable than pity would have. She stood and carried the ledger toward the shelf. It doesn't matter now. Nathan remained seated. Seems like it matters. No. You crossed 2,000 miles because it mattered. Clara turned. What would you like me to say? Nathan was silent. She continued before he could answer. That I was desperate? Her voice had sharpened. Her voice had sharpened. That I saw a newspaper advertisement and convinced myself marriage to a stranger was preferable to spending another decade living in my sister's spare room. I didn't say that. That I believed 6 letters because I wanted somewhere to belong badly enough to ignore how absurd the whole arrangement was. Nathan stood. Clara. She hated the heat gathering behind her eyes. So yes, it mattered. She placed the ledger on the shelf harder than necessary. And now I'm stranded in the home of another stranger, doing his laundry and keeping his books because if I stop working for 5 minutes, I have to remember that everything I came west for was a lie. The room became completely still. Clara turned away. She had not meant to say any of it. Especially not to him. I'm sorry. Nathan did not answer. That somehow made it worse. She wiped quickly beneath one eye. I shouldn't have. You don't need to apologize. His voice came from directly behind her. Clara turned. Nathan stood several feet away. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she could see something in his expression she had not seen before. Understanding. Whitaker lied, he said. You believed him. Those aren't the same thing. Clara swallowed. I should have known. How? I should have asked more questions. He would have lied to those too. I should have waited. For what? She had no answer. Nathan took his hat from the table. You took a chance. And lost. Maybe. Clara looked at him. Maybe? Nathan's eyes held hers for one quiet second. Then he looked away. The story isn't finished yet. Before she could respond, a horse whinnied sharply outside. Nathan turned toward the window. Another sound followed. Hooves striking wood. Nathan moved immediately. That's Rose. He was through the door before Clara could ask what was wrong. She followed him toward the corral. The chestnut mare was struggling near the fence. One hind leg had become caught between 2 broken rails damaged during the storm. Nathan approached slowly. Easy, girl. Rose kicked violently. The rail cracked. Nathan reached for her halter. Clara stopped several yards away. What can I do? Stay back." Rose pulled again. The broken timber shifted dangerously. Nathan moved closer. The mare reared. Her shoulder struck him hard enough to send him backward into the mud. "Nathan!" Clara ran forward. "I said stay back. You're bleeding." A cut had opened above his eyebrow. "It's nothing." Rose kicked again. Nathan got to his knees. Clara looked at the trapped leg, then at the rail. "You can't pull her forward." "I know. If she panics again, she'll break the leg." Nathan glanced at her. "You know horses?" "No." "Then, but I know frightened things." Nathan froze. Clara stepped slowly toward the mare. "Clara." She ignored him. Rose's eyes were wide. Her breathing came fast. Clara stopped several feet from her head. "Hello, Rose." The mare jerked once. Clara did not move. "You don't know me." She kept her voice low. "But apparently neither of us has had a particularly good week." Nathan stared at her. Clara continued speaking quietly. "Anything. Nothing." Words mattered less than tone. Rose gradually stopped fighting. Nathan moved toward the trapped leg. "Keep talking." Clara did. She told the horse about Illinois, about her sister's children, about the terrible biscuits she had once made when she was 12. Nathan worked behind her. After a tense minute, he lifted the broken rail. Rose pulled her leg free. She stumbled forward. Clara caught the halter. Nathan immediately examined the mare's leg. "No break." Clara released a breath. "Are you sure?" "She's lucky." Nathan stood. Blood had begun running down the side of his face. Clara frowned. "You are less lucky." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that when it clearly isn't true." Back inside, Clara made him sit beside the table. Nathan protested until she pressed a clean cloth to the cut. He stopped talking. "Hold still." "I am." "You're scowling." "That doesn't move my head. It makes the patient unpleasant." Nathan looked up at her. Clara was standing between his knees, one hand gently holding his temple while the other cleaned the cut. Only after several seconds did she realize how intimate the position was. She stopped. Nathan did too. Their faces were scarcely a foot apart. His eyes were not as dark as she had thought. Hazel. Brown near the center, green toward the edges. Clara's hand remained against his cheek. Neither moved. Then Nathan quietly said her name. "Clara." She stepped back immediately. "The cut isn't deep." Nathan looked toward the table. "Good. I'll get a bandage." She turned too quickly and nearly knocked over the basin. Behind her, Nathan cleared his throat. Neither mentioned the moment, but Clara felt it for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, they ate supper at opposite sides of the table. The distance between them had never seemed smaller. Nathan eventually broke the silence. "You were good with Rose." "I told you. I understand frightened things." His expression softened. "Were you frightened when you knocked on my door?" Clara considered lying. "Yes." "Of me?" "Of everything." Nathan nodded. "And now?" She looked around the cabin, at the repaired cabinet, at her sewing basket beside his ledger, at his coat hanging beside hers near the door. Then she looked at him. Not as much. Something moved in Nathan's face. Hope, perhaps, or danger. He stood and gathered his bedroll. The creek should be low enough tomorrow. Clara's heart sank. "For you to ride into town?" "Yes." "Mrs. Dalton?" Nathan nodded. "I'll ask about the job." This was what she wanted, what she needed. Clara forced a smile. "Thank you." Nathan walked toward the door. His hand rested on the latch. Then Clara asked, "Nathan?" He turned. "If Mrs. Dalton says yes." She stopped. "What?" Clara looked down at her hands. "How soon would I have to leave?" Nathan did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "As soon as you want." That was not what Clara had asked, and somehow, both of them knew it. Nathan left before sunrise. Clara heard him moving quietly through the main room, while darkness still covered the windows. She remained awake in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Neither of them had slept much. At least, Clara assumed Nathan had not. She certainly had not. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his answer again. As soon as you want. Not when Mrs. Dalton wanted her. Not when the road opened. Not when the weather cleared. When Clara wanted. It should have been comforting. Instead, it had kept her awake half the night. By the time she stepped from the bedroom, Nathan was fastening his gun belt. A cold breakfast waited on the table. Bread, 2 boiled eggs, coffee. "You're leaving now?" He looked toward her. "Creek's lowest before the sun warms the snowmelt." "I thought there wasn't any snow yet." "Mountains have it." Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. "How long will you be gone?" "Few hours." She nodded. Nathan picked up his hat, then stopped. "There's a rifle over the fireplace." Clara glanced at it. "I saw. Loaded. I assumed. If someone comes, I know how to use a rifle." That surprised him. "My father taught me." Nathan studied her for a second. "Of course he did. What is that supposed to mean?" "You keep having skills I don't expect." "Perhaps your expectations are too low." That almost brought the familiar half-smile. Almost. Then Nathan opened the door. Cold morning air entered the cabin. Clara stepped toward him. "Nathan." He turned. She suddenly had no idea what she wanted to say. "Come back safely" sounded too personal. "Ask Mrs. Dalton" sounded too eager. "Do not ask Mrs. Dalton" sounded impossible. So she settled on, "Be careful at the crossing." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "I will." Then he left. Clara watched from the porch as he saddled his horse and rode toward the northern trail. He looked back once. Only once. Then the ridge swallowed him. The ranch became unbearably quiet. Clara attempted to occupy herself. She scrubbed the breakfast dishes, swept a floor that did not require sweeping, folded blankets, rearranged Nathan's pantry, then rearranged it back, because she decided he would never find anything otherwise. Eventually, she sat at the table with the account ledger. Nathan had given her permission to look at it yesterday. That permission felt strangely important now. She calculated grain costs, estimated repairs to the western barn, worked out what Nathan might save if he sold several older cattle before winter rather than feeding them for another season. She became so absorbed that nearly 2 hours passed unnoticed. Then she found something wedged between 2 pages near the back. An envelope. It had not been hidden deliberately. It was simply old, flattened, and forgotten. Clara almost closed the book. Then she saw the handwriting on the front. Mr. Nathan Cole. The ink had faded. She did not open it. Instead, she turned the envelope over. The seal had already been broken. Written in another hand across the back was a date, 7 years earlier. Clara thought of Rose, Emily. She quickly returned the letter exactly where she had found it. Some things did not belong to her, not yet, perhaps never. The thought hurt more than it should have. Near noon, hoofbeats finally sounded outside. Clara was at the door before Nathan reached the porch. Mud covered his boots. His coat was damp along one shoulder. But he was smiling. Not broadly. Nathan Cole did nothing broadly. Still, she knew the news before he spoke. "Mrs. Dalton needs someone." Clara's hands tightened around the edge of the door. "Oh." Nathan dismounted. "She'll give you a room." "Meals, $5 a week. That's generous. She needs help badly." "When?" Nathan tied the horse to the rail. "Tomorrow, if you want." There it was again. "If you want." Clara forced herself to smile. "That's wonderful." Nathan nodded. "Yes." Neither moved. Finally, Clara stepped aside. "You must be hungry." "Little. I made stew." "You made stew yesterday." "I improved it." "That seems ambitious." He entered. Clara closed the door behind him. For the next hour, they behaved as though nothing had changed. That was the problem. Everything had. Clara served lunch. Nathan ate. They discussed Mrs. Dalton's boarding house. 12 rooms. Mostly railway workers and cattle buyers. Laundry twice a week. Breakfast every morning before 6. Clara would sew for extra money when possible. It was sensible, safe, respectable, exactly the sort of opportunity she needed. After the meal, Nathan went to repair the west barn. Clara began packing. It took less than 20 minutes. That embarrassed her. 28 years of life reduced to one suitcase. 2 dresses, 1 winter coat, 3 books, sewing things, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, the letters from Thomas Whitaker. Clara held those last, then walked to the stove. She placed the first letter into the fire. The paper curled immediately. Thomas's careful handwriting blackened. The second followed, then the third. By the 6th letter, Clara felt nothing, almost nothing. She watched the final page collapse into ash. You could have kept them as evidence. Nathan's voice startled her. She turned. He stood in the doorway holding a hammer. How long have you been there? Long enough. I don't need evidence. If Whitaker ever comes back, he won't. Nathan looked toward the fire. You sure? No. Clara folded her arms. But I refuse to let a man who lied to me occupy space in my suitcase. Nathan leaned against the doorframe. That sounds practical. It is. And angry. That too. He glanced toward the bedroom. You packed? Yes. Something changed in his expression. Very little. But Clara had learned to read Nathan Cole in increments. I thought I might as well be ready. You're leaving tomorrow. That is usually when packing occurs. Nathan set the hammer on the table. Right. Clara looked away. She wanted him to say something else. Anything else. He did not. So she picked up a folded cloth and began wiping a perfectly clean counter. Nathan watched her. Finally he said, Mrs. Dalton's decent. I'm sure. She won't take advantage of you. I know. If she does, tell me. Clara stopped wiping. What would you do? Something. Despite everything, she smiled. That is very specific. Nathan's voice remained serious. She knows you're under my protection. Clara's smile vanished. Your protection? He seemed to realize the phrase had escaped before he could reconsider it. I know what you meant. But she did not. Not entirely. Nathan picked up the hammer again. I need to finish that roof. He left before Clara could ask anything else. Late that afternoon, a wagon appeared on the southern trail. Nathan saw it first. He came from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. Clara stepped onto the porch. A heavy-set man in a brown coat drove the wagon. He pulled up near the fence. Cole! Nathan descended the porch. Turner. The visitor glanced toward Clara. His expression changed instantly. Well now. Clara disliked the tone. Nathan noticed. What do you need? Turner grinned. Heard you had company. Who told you? Whole town knows. Nathan's jaw tightened. Clara felt her stomach turn. Turner continued. Word is some bride showed up looking for Whitaker and ended up staying here instead. Nathan stepped closer to the wagon. She was stranded by the bridge. Sure. The man's grin widened. Clara felt heat rise in her face. Nathan's voice became cold. You came 6 miles to gossip? No offense meant. Then leave before you manage some. Turner lifted his hands. Easy. He looked at Clara again. So you're Whitaker's girl. Clara answered, before Nathan could. No. Mail order arrangement, wasn't it? It was. Turner chuckled. Bad luck. Nathan moved between them. That's enough. Turner's smile disappeared. For the first time, he seemed to realize Nathan was not merely irritated. He was angry. All right. Turner gathered his reins. Just thought you'd want to know folks are talking. Now I know. The wagon rolled away. Nathan watched until it disappeared. Clara remained on the porch. She felt foolishly exposed. The humiliation she had managed to keep contained inside this ranch had suddenly reached town before she had. Nathan turned. Don't listen to him. It isn't him I'm worried about. Then what? Tomorrow I have to walk into Red Creek. Nathan climbed the steps. So? So everyone will know. His brow furrowed. Clara laughed once, bitterly. You're a man. Of course you don't understand. Explain. She looked toward the road. A woman travels across the country to marry a stranger. The stranger disappears. She spends nearly a week alone at another unmarried man's ranch. Nathan's expression darkened. Nothing happened. That has never stopped people from talking. He said nothing. Clara continued. Mrs. Dalton may change her mind. She won't. You can't know that. I told her everything. Clara turned sharply. Everything? That Whitaker lied. That the bridge washed out. That you stayed here because you had nowhere else to go. And that if anybody tells the story differently, they're lying. Clara stared at him. You said that? Yes. Why? Nathan looked genuinely confused. Because it's true. She almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because Nathan Cole seemed completely incapable of understanding how extraordinary his answer was. You didn't owe me that. I know. There it was again. The same answer she had given every time she cooked for him, mended his shirts, cleaned his house. I know. Clara looked down. Thank you. Nathan nodded. Then he said, If you don't want the boarding house, you don't have to take it. Her eyes lifted. What? You heard me. I need work. There's work here. Clara's heartbeat changed. Nathan. The barn accounts need keeping. That doesn't require a full-time employee. House does. You told me you didn't need a housekeeper. I was wrong. Clara stared at him. The wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. Nathan seemed suddenly more nervous than he had been, while freeing Rose from the fence. How much? Clara asked. What? If this is employment, what are you offering? Nathan clearly had not considered that far. $5. A week? Yes. Mrs. Dalton offered $5, plus meals and a room. You'd get meals. And a room? Nathan glanced toward the cabin. Yes. That is your room. There are 2 rooms above the barn office. They are unfinished. I can finish one. Clara folded her arms. So instead of allowing me to take an existing job in town, you propose constructing living quarters, so I can work here doing tasks you managed perfectly well before I arrived. Nathan was silent. Clara stepped closer. Why? He looked at her. For once, there was no guarded answer waiting, no practical explanation, no half-truth. I don't know. Clara's chest tightened. Yes, you do. Nathan's jaw moved. He looked toward the fields. Then the barn. Anywhere except her. Finally he said quietly, The house is different when you're in it. Clara stopped breathing. Nathan continued before courage could desert him. I come inside, and there's food on the stove. Someone moved the coffee again. My shirts don't have holes. You argue with me about grain prices. A small, helpless smile touched Clara's mouth. Nathan looked at her then. And when you laugh. He stopped. What? He shook his head. Nothing. Nathan. His eyes held hers. When you laugh, it sounds like this place is a home. The words hit harder than any declaration of love could have. Because Nathan had not asked for a wife. He had not promised Clara anything. He had simply admitted that her presence had changed the shape of his loneliness. Clara looked toward the suitcase visible through the open door. Yesterday, leaving had seemed inevitable. Now, for the first time, it felt like a choice. That isn't a good enough reason to hire someone, she whispered. No. You'd be wasting money. Probably. And you still need to repair the barn roof before buying grain. I know. Clara looked back at him. Your business judgment is deteriorating. Nathan's mouth curved. Seems that way. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Clara asked the question that frightened her most. If I stayed, Nathan became completely still. Would I be working for you? Yes. Only working? His smile disappeared. The question hung between them. Nathan stepped closer, not close enough to touch her. I don't know what I can promise you, Clara. She appreciated that more than she could say. No beautiful words, no carefully written lies. Only the truth. Neither do I. Nathan nodded. Then maybe we don't promise anything yet. Clara looked down the road Turner had taken. Tomorrow, she could ride into Red Creek, take Mrs. Dalton's room, build a respectable life independent of Nathan Cole. It was the sensible decision. She had already trusted one stranger with her future. Doing so again would be madness. But Nathan had never asked her to trust him. He had simply given her reasons to. One night, in his bedroom, while he slept in a barn, a bucket of water beside the stove, a place at the table, a defense of her name before she even knew it needed defending. Clara looked back at him. "I'll stay 1 month." Nathan blinked. 1 month? As an employee. His expression warmed. $5 a week. Plus room and meals. Yes. And I keep the accounts. Fine. And you repair the barn roof. That part feels unrelated. It is not. Nathan held out his hand. Clara looked at it, then placed hers in his. His fingers closed carefully around hers. "A month," he said. "A month." Neither released the other. Not immediately. Clara felt the roughness of his palm. Nathan's thumb moved once across her knuckles. Barely. Then they separated. That night, Nathan did not gather his bedroll. Clara noticed. He stood awkwardly beside the table after supper. "I finished cleaning the office room." She looked at him. "In one afternoon?" "Mostly." "You planned this before asking me?" "No." "Nathan. Maybe a little." She laughed. There it was again. The sound that made the cabin a home. Nathan smiled openly this time. "I'll sleep there tonight." Clara nodded. "Good." He reached for his coat, then paused beside her. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you knocked on the wrong door." Her smile faded into something softer. "So am I." Nathan left for the barn. Clara closed the door behind him, but did not bolt it. And on the kitchen table, beneath Nathan's ledger, her ticket timetable to Illinois remained untouched. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Clara no longer wondered when she would go home. She was beginning to wonder whether she already had. The first week of Clara's employment passed with suspicious ease. Too much ease, she thought. Nathan paid her $5 on Saturday morning as agreed. He placed the coins beside her coffee without ceremony. Clara counted them. Exactly 5. Nathan looked offended. "You thought I'd cheat you? I thought you might forget." "I don't forget debts." She looked at him. "No. I suppose you don't." By then, the ranch had already begun changing. Not dramatically. The same weathered cabin stood beside the same barn. The fences still needed work. The wind still found every crack in the windows. But the western barn no longer leaked. Nathan had repaired it in 2 days, partly because Clara had reminded him of the grain savings every time he tried to postpone it. 3 wagon loads of winter feed now sat beneath the new roof. The purchase had cost more at once than Nathan liked. Clara showed him the numbers until he stopped complaining. "You saved $63 already," she said. "I spent $200. You would have spent $263 later." "Still feels like I spent $200. That is because mathematics has failed to cure stubbornness." Nathan leaned against the barn door. "You always this pleasant with employers?" "Only the ones who require supervision." He laughed. Nathan laughed more now. Clara noticed that before she noticed almost anything else. The first time had startled her. By the second week, she began waiting for it. She learned how to provoke the sound with small criticisms. His handwriting, his cooking, his refusal to replace a pair of boots held together by more patch than leather. Nathan responded by inventing reasons to criticize her. She used too many dishes when cooking. She stole his side of the table. She hummed while keeping accounts, and claimed she did not. "I do not hum." "You do. Name one song." "Don't know the name." "Then perhaps the sound is coming from outside. Unless the cattle learned hymns, it's you." Clara tried not to smile. Failed. By the second week, Nathan stopped calling the west room in the barn office his sleeping quarters. He simply called it his room. The bedroom in the cabin became Clara's. Neither discussed how permanent that sounded. The arrangement remained proper. Nathan knocked, before entering the cabin early in the morning, if Clara had not yet opened the shutters. Clara never entered his room without permission. They ate together, worked together, sometimes spent entire evenings in comfortable silence. Nothing improper occurred. Red Creek, naturally, remained unconvinced. Clara discovered that on her first visit to town, after choosing to remain at the ranch, Nathan drove. She sat beside him with a list of household supplies and 3 finished dresses she hoped Mrs. Dalton could help sell. The moment their wagon entered the main street, Clara felt eyes following them. A woman outside the mercantile whispered to another. 2 cattlemen looked directly at Clara, then at Nathan. Turner stood outside the saloon. His grin appeared immediately. Clara stiffened. Nathan noticed. "You want to go home?" The word slipped out naturally. Home. Neither commented on it. "No." Clara lifted her chin. "I want sugar, lamp oil, and sewing needles." Nathan nodded. "Good." He stopped the wagon outside Miller's General Store. Clara climbed down before he could assist her. Inside, conversation weakened. Not stopped. That would have been too obvious. But softened. Mrs. Miller stood behind the counter. She was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed. Her gaze went from Clara to Nathan. "So." Nathan removed his hat. "Morning, Edith. I heard you'd hired help." "I did." Mrs. Miller looked at Clara. "You Clara Bennett?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman studied her for several seconds. Clara braced herself. Then Mrs. Miller said, "Dalton's been complaining you chose Cole's place over hers." Clara blinked. "She has. Claims she hasn't had a decent biscuit since." Nathan coughed suspiciously. Clara looked at him. "Do not encourage this." Mrs. Miller laughed. The tension broke. Within minutes, Clara was discussing fabric prices with her. Nathan wandered toward the tools. For the first time, Clara felt she might survive Red Creek after all. Then a man entered the store. Tall, clean coat, silver watch chain. He stopped when he saw Clara. "You must be Miss Bennett." She turned. "I'm afraid you have the advantage. Charles Mercer." Nathan returned immediately. Too immediately. Clara noticed. Mercer extended his hand. Clara shook it. He had the smooth palms of a man who managed ranches rather than repaired them. "I heard about Whitaker," Mercer said. Clara's smile cooled. "So has everyone, apparently. A disgraceful business." "Yes." Mercer glanced toward Nathan. "And now you're working for Cole." "I am." "Interesting choice." Nathan spoke. "You need something, Mercer?" Mercer smiled. "Just supplies." His attention returned to Clara. "I own the Bar M east of town." Clara had seen that name in Nathan's ledgers. Mercer supplied grain. At inflated prices. She smiled politely. "I know." That seemed to surprise him. "You do?" "I keep Mr. Cole's accounts." Nathan's mouth twitched. Mercer's did not. "Then perhaps we should discuss business sometime." "Perhaps." Mercer tipped his hat. "Miss Bennett." He walked away. Clara waited until he reached the far end of the store. Then she turned toward Nathan. "You dislike him." Nathan picked up a box of nails. "I dislike his prices." "Only his prices?" "Yes." "You walked across the entire shop because he introduced himself." "I needed nails." Clara looked at the shelf. They were standing beside kitchen pots. Nathan followed her gaze. He put the imaginary nails back. Clara tried very hard not to laugh. "You're jealous." Nathan stared at her. "No. You are." "Of Mercer?" "Yes." Nathan folded his arms. "He's 45. So? His hair looks polished. That is not a reason not to be jealous. He wears city boots." Clara's smile widened. Nathan looked suddenly irritated with himself. "I'm not jealous." "Of course not." He lowered his voice. "Clara." "Yes, Nathan?" "Buy your needles." She did, smiling the entire time. But the amusement disappeared that afternoon. They had barely left town when Nathan saw riders on the North Ridge. 3 men. One horse carried a familiar black saddlebag. Nathan slowed the wagon. Clara looked toward him. "What is it?" He did not answer. The riders descended. The man in front raised one hand. Nathan stopped completely. Clara recognized none of them. But the lead rider knew Nathan. Cole. Nathan's expression hardened. "Sheriff." Clara felt something tighten inside her. The sheriff removed his hat. Need a word. Nathan climbed down from the wagon. Clara remained seated. The sheriff looked at her, then back at Nathan. Probably better in private. You can say it here. The sheriff hesitated, then reached into his coat. He removed an envelope. Message came through the telegraph office this morning. Nathan took it. What about? The sheriff's gaze shifted toward Clara. Thomas Whitaker. Every bit of warmth left her body. Nathan did not move. What about him? The sheriff answered quietly. He's coming back to Wyoming. Clara stared at him. Nathan's fingers tightened around the envelope. When? Train reaches Red Creek Tuesday. 3 days. For nearly a month, Thomas Whitaker had existed only as ash in Clara's stove. A mistake, a vanished man, a chapter she had believed closed. Now he was coming back, and Nathan looked more dangerous than Clara had ever seen him. Why? Nathan asked. The sheriff glanced again at Clara. Says there's been a misunderstanding. Clara's stomach turned. The sheriff continued. And he says Miss Bennett still belongs to the marriage arrangement he made. Nathan stepped forward. Clara had never heard his voice sound like this. Low, cold, absolute. She doesn't belong to anybody. She doesn't belong to anybody. Nathan's words remained in the cold afternoon air long after the sheriff had ridden away. Clara sat beside him in the wagon, hands folded tightly in her lap. Neither spoke for the first mile. Nathan drove faster than usual. Too fast. The wagon wheels struck a rut hard enough to jolt Clara sideways. Nathan. He pulled back on the reins immediately. Sorry. That isn't what I meant. He stared at the road. Clara studied the hard line of his jaw. You're angry. Yes? At Thomas? Yes? At me? Nathan turned so sharply she almost regretted asking. No. Then stop looking as though you intend to murder the horizon. His grip loosened slightly on the reins. I'm not going to murder anyone. That is reassuring. Probably. Clara stared at him. Nathan. I said probably. Despite herself, a nervous laugh escaped her. Nathan did not laugh. That frightened her more than his anger. She looked ahead. Maybe Thomas really does think there was a misunderstanding. Nathan's expression darkened. He sold the ranch 6 months before telling you to come here. I know. He left the territory. I know. He kept writing as though he still lived here. I know. And now that he hears you're living on my ranch, suddenly he discovers a misunderstanding? Clara had no answer. Nathan's voice softened. He's not coming back because he wants to explain. What does he want? I don't know. That was precisely what worried him. Clara could hear it. When they reached the ranch, Nathan took the horses immediately to the barn. Clara carried the supplies inside. The cabin felt different. Nothing had changed physically. Her shawl still hung beside Nathan's coat. The ledger remained open on the table. A loaf of bread she had baked that morning sat cooling beneath a cloth. Yet Thomas Whitaker had somehow entered the house without touching the door. Clara stood at the stove and remembered his letters, the promises, his careful handwriting, his description of a future that had never existed. She had burned every page. For the first time, she wished she had not. Not because she wanted the letters, because she wanted proof. Nathan entered 10 minutes later. Sheriff said he'd come by tomorrow. Clara turned. Why? To make sure Whitaker doesn't cause trouble. I don't need guarding. Nathan removed his coat. I didn't ask him. You look pleased about it. I am. Clara folded her arms. I handled my life before I met you. I know. I traveled here alone. I know. I can speak to Thomas myself. Nathan's jaw tightened. I know. She watched him. And I still don't like it. Something about his answer took the sharpness out of her. Clara lowered her arms. You think he'll hurt me? Nathan looked toward the window. I think a man who lies for 6 months has more than one lie in him. That evening, they tried to behave normally. Clara made supper. Nathan repaired a loose chair leg. Neither succeeded. Every sound of hoofbeats made Nathan look toward the door. Every gust of wind made Clara think of a train approaching Red Creek. Finally, she placed her spoon down. "Nathan." He looked up. "What?" "Tell me about Emily." The request clearly surprised him. He leaned back. "Why now?" "Because Thomas arrives in 3 days, and I don't want those 3 days to belong to him." Nathan said nothing. Clara continued quietly. "I know almost nothing about the person you were before I came here." His gaze dropped toward his hands. For several seconds she thought he would refuse. Then he said, "Emily hated Wyoming." Clara had not expected that. She did? She tried not to. A faint smile touched his face. She was from Missouri. Thought winters there were cold until she spent one here. Clara smiled. "How did you meet?" "Church picnic." "You went to church picnics." "I was 22. That does not answer the question." Nathan ignored the insult. "She beat me in a shooting contest." Clara's eyebrows rose. "I like her already." "So did I." The smile remained for another moment, then disappeared. "We married 6 months later." Clara waited. Nathan stared at the lamp flame. "We bought a little place south of Cheyenne. Nothing like this ranch. 30 acres, 2 cows, bad roof." "Was she happy?" "Eventually." The answer carried sadness. She wanted children. Clara understood where the story was going before Nathan said it. He swallowed. "She got pregnant 4 years after we married." Clara's chest tightened. Nathan's voice became quieter. "Winter came early that year. Doctor couldn't reach us." He stopped. Clara did not ask him to continue. He did anyway. "The baby died before sunrise." His fingers closed slowly around the edge of the table. "Emily died that afternoon." "Nathan." "I buried them together." The room became painfully silent. 7 years. Clara thought of Rose grazing alone. The empty bedroom. The cabin without photographs. The man sleeping in the barn because he had not wanted a frightened woman to feel unsafe. "I'm sorry." Nathan nodded. "After that, I sold the place." "And bought this ranch?" "Eventually." "Why here?" "No memories." Clara looked around the room. Now she understood the emptiness. It had not been neglect. Nathan had built a life deliberately without attachments, because attachments could disappear. "You never wanted to marry again?" "No." "Until now?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Nathan looked at her. Neither moved. Clara felt heat rise into her face. "I didn't mean—" "Yes." Her breath caught. Nathan had answered too quickly to pretend otherwise. He stood. Clara remained seated. "Yes, what?" His eyes held hers. "Yes, until now." The room seemed suddenly too small. Nathan walked toward the window and rested both hands against the sill. "I wasn't going to say anything." "Why?" "Because you came here expecting a husband once already." Clara stood slowly. "And?" "And I'm not going to become another man deciding what your future ought to be." She stepped closer. "Nathan." He turned. "I hired you because I wanted you here. I know. I told myself that was enough." "Is it?" "No." The answer was almost a whisper. Clara's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Nathan looked at her as though honesty physically hurt. "I think about you when I'm in the north pasture." She smiled faintly. "That is inconvenient. I think about whether you've eaten, whether you're cold, whether you'll be sitting at the table when I come back." He took one step closer. "And when Mercer looked at you in that store, I wanted to throw him through a window." Clara's smile grew. "So you were jealous. That is what you took from this. It's satisfying to be proven right." Nathan shook his head. Then his expression became serious again. "But Thomas arrives Tuesday." Clara's smile disappeared. "Yes. And until you've faced whatever he came back to say, I won't ask anything of you." "You think I still want him?" "No." "Then what are you afraid of?" Nathan looked at her. "That you'll choose me because he hurt you." The words silenced her. He continued, "I don't want to be the better man, only because Whitaker was worse." Clara stared at him. "You think that's what this is?" "I don't know." "I do." Nathan became still. Clara stepped close enough that only a few inches separated them. "When I arrived here, Thomas Whitaker was supposed to be my future." Her voice remained steady. But he was never real to me, Nathan. Not really. He was 6 letters and a photograph. Nathan said nothing. You are the man who brought water inside because I struggled with the bucket. His eyes softened. The man who pretended he needed a housekeeper because he didn't want me to leave. I did need one. You absolutely did not. Debatable. The man who defended my reputation in town before I even knew anyone was talking about me. Clara's voice lowered. And the man who slept in a barn for nearly a week because he wanted a stranger to feel safe. Nathan looked away. She reached for his hand. He allowed her fingers to close around his. That is not Thomas's failure. Nathan looked back at her. That is you. For one breathless moment, Clara thought he might kiss her. His eyes dropped to her lips. His hand tightened around hers. Then a horse approached outside. Both froze. The sound stopped directly beyond the porch. Nathan moved instinctively in front of Clara. A knock struck the door. 3 slow blows. Nathan looked toward the rifle over the fireplace. Clara's heart hammered. It can't be Thomas. Train doesn't arrive until Tuesday. Another knock. Nathan opened the door only halfway. Sheriff Daniel Pike stood outside. His expression was grim. Sorry to come this late. Nathan opened the door wider. What happened? Pike removed his hat. Whitaker's train came early. Clara went cold. Nathan's face hardened. Where is he? In Red Creek. The sheriff glanced toward Clara. He arrived an hour ago. Clara stepped forward. Did he say why he came? Pike hesitated. Yes. Nathan noticed. Say it. The sheriff looked directly at Clara. Whitaker claims the letters he sent you constitute a binding marriage agreement. Clara stared at him. That's ridiculous. I agree, Pike continued. But he brought a lawyer. Nathan's expression changed. A lawyer? And documents. What documents? The sheriff drew a folded paper from inside his coat. He says you signed them before leaving Illinois. Clara took the paper. She recognized her signature immediately. Her stomach dropped. The matrimonial agency agreement. But something had been added beneath it. A paragraph she had never seen. It stated that upon marriage, property or wages acquired by Clara Bennett during the first 5 years of the union could be placed under her husband's management. Nathan read over her shoulder. What is this? I never signed this. You signed the page. Not with that paragraph on it. Pike nodded. That's what I suspected. Clara's mind raced. Why would Thomas want my wages? I have nothing. Nathan looked toward the ledger. Then his face changed. Clara followed his gaze. The grain purchases, cattle sales, the ranch accounts she now managed. No, she whispered. Nathan understood. Whitaker sold me this ranch cheap because he was drowning in debt. Pike nodded. He still owes money. Clara looked between them. Nathan's voice hardened. How much? More than anyone thought. The sheriff put his hat back on, and if what I heard tonight is correct, he believes Miss Bennett can help him get access to this ranch again. Clara stared at Nathan. Through me? Pike answered. If he convinces a judge that your agreement made you his intended legal dependent before he sold the property, he may try to argue fraud in the sale or claim financial interest through whatever arrangement you now have with Cole. Nathan laughed once. There was no humor in it. He's desperate. Very. Pike turned toward Clara. He asked me to bring you into town tomorrow. Nathan immediately said, no. Clara looked at him. Nathan. No. The sheriff raised a hand. I didn't say she had to. Nathan's jaw remained tight. Clara folded the document. I'm going. Nathan turned toward her. You don't owe him a conversation. No. She held up the paper. But I owe myself one. Clara. I crossed 2,000 miles because of that man. Her voice remained calm. I will not spend the rest of my life wondering why. Nathan stared at her. She stepped closer. And I am not hiding in your house while you fight my battles. Something in his expression softened. Fine. Fine? I'm going with you. Nathan. That part isn't negotiable. Clara almost argued. Then she remembered the way he had said she belonged to nobody. She nodded. All right. Pike looked between them. I'll meet you outside the courthouse at 9. After the sheriff left, Nathan bolted the door. Clara placed Whitaker's forged document on the table. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally Nathan said, "You should sleep." "So should you." "I won't." "Neither will I." He looked at her. Clara reached for his hand again. This time Nathan did not hesitate. His fingers closed around hers. Tomorrow she would face the man she had once crossed a continent to marry. But standing in the quiet cabin beside Nathan Cole, Clara understood something with absolute certainty. She was no longer afraid of choosing the wrong man. She already knew which one was right. Red Creek had never looked so small. Clara noticed that as Nathan drove the wagon into town the next morning. Perhaps it was because every face seemed turned toward them. Perhaps it was because somewhere beyond the courthouse doors waited the man whose 6 letters had once been large enough to contain her entire future. Nathan sat beside her in silence. He had spoken very little since breakfast. Clara knew why. His right hand rested near his thigh, too near the revolver at his belt. She looked at it. Nathan. His eyes remained on the road. "What?" "You promised not to murder anyone." I said probably. That was not a promise. It was the closest thing available. Clara tried not to smile. "Try harder." Nathan finally looked at her. "I'm going to stand beside you." "That is all I need." His expression softened. "Fine." They stopped outside the courthouse. Sheriff Pike was already waiting. So was half the town. Men stood near the mercantile, pretending to discuss horses. Women lingered outside the bakery. Turner leaned against a hitching post with the look of a man who had discovered entertainment more interesting than work. Nathan climbed down first, then offered Clara his hand. She accepted it. The moment her boots touched the street, conversation across the road nearly vanished. Clara straightened her coat. Nathan glanced toward the onlookers. "Want me to clear them?" "With what?" He looked toward Turner. "Methods." "Nathan." "Fine." Sheriff Pike approached. "He's inside." Clara's stomach tightened. "Alone?" "With his lawyer." "Who?" "Samuel Prentice. Came from Cheyenne." Nathan frowned. "You know him?" "By reputation." Pike lowered his voice. "Expensive." That bothered Clara. Thomas Whitaker had been drowning in debt. Where had he found money for an expensive lawyer? Pike seemed to read the question on her face. "I'm wondering the same thing." They entered. The courthouse smelled of old wood, coal smoke and damp wool. The room beyond the main hall was modest. A desk, several chairs. A judge's bench used during monthly hearings. Thomas Whitaker stood near the window. Clara recognized him immediately. The photograph had been flattering. That was her first thought. He was perhaps 36, medium height, neatly dressed, with sandy hair combed carefully back from his forehead. His coat was better than Nathan's, his boots cleaner, his hands softer. He turned when Clara entered. His expression transformed. "Clara." Nathan stopped beside her. Thomas looked at him. Something cold entered his face, then disappeared behind a smile. "You must be Cole." Nathan did not offer his hand. "Nathan Cole." Thomas's gaze returned to Clara. "I'm glad you came." Clara felt nothing. That surprised her. For weeks she had imagined what she might feel if Thomas ever stood before her. Anger, shame, perhaps some lingering confusion. Instead, looking at him now, she felt only distance. "You asked for me." Thomas stepped closer. "I owe you an explanation." "Yes." He waited. Clara did not make the conversation easier. Finally Thomas sighed. "When I left Wyoming, I intended to send word immediately." "You did send word." He frowned. "Clara, 6 letters." Thomas glanced toward his lawyer. Samuel Prentice was an older man with silver spectacles and a dark suit. He remained silent. Clara continued. "You wrote that your cattle were doing well." Thomas shifted. "You wrote that you were adding another room to the cabin." His face tightened. "You told me to arrive at the ranch because you would be waiting." "I can explain. You sold the ranch 6 months earlier." Nathan remained perfectly still beside her. Thomas looked toward him. I made a mistake. Nathan's voice was flat. You made 6. Clara touched his arm lightly. Nathan fell silent. Thomas looked back at her. I was ashamed. Of what? Everything. For the first time, something resembling genuine embarrassment crossed his face. My debts were worse than I admitted. I know. I thought I could recover. So you continued writing? Yes. And invited me west. Shh. Thomas lowered his voice. I thought I would have something rebuilt by then. Where? California. Clara stared at him. You expected me to arrive at a ranch you no longer owned, discover you were gone, and somehow find you in California? No. Then what exactly did you expect? Thomas had no answer. Nathan shifted beside her. Clara felt the anger radiating from him. But this was her question, her confrontation. She continued. When did you learn I had arrived? A few weeks ago. How? A man from Red Creek passed through Sacramento. Turner. Thomas did not answer. That was answer enough. Clara almost laughed. Of course. Gossip traveled faster than trains. And when you heard I was living at Nathan's ranch, you suddenly remembered our agreement. Thomas's face hardened. It was my ranch once. Nathan spoke before Clara could stop him. Not anymore. Prentice finally stepped forward. Gentlemen? Nathan looked at him. There's only one gentleman in this room discussing ownership of a woman. Prentice adjusted his spectacles. My client does not claim ownership of Miss Bennett. Nathan looked toward the altered agreement. Could have fooled me. Thomas stepped closer to Clara. What happened between you and Cole? The question was so presumptuous that Clara stared at him. What? You've been staying with him. Nathan's expression changed instantly. Clara raised one hand before he could move. Thomas continued. You were supposed to be my wife. No. You traveled here for that purpose. I traveled here because you lied to me. I made a mistake. You abandoned me before I arrived. I didn't know exactly when you would come. You told me the date. Thomas's mouth closed. Clara stepped closer. You do not get to disappear for 6 months and then return because you heard another man treated me better than you did. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Jealousy. There it was. Ugly and small. He looked toward Nathan. This is about him. No. Thomas laughed. Of course it is. He pointed toward Nathan. You think he's some hero because he gave you a bed? Nathan moved. Sheriff Pike stepped between them immediately. Cole. Nathan stopped. Barely. Clara's voice became cold. He gave me his bed. Thomas frowned. What? And slept in the barn. Silence. Clara continued. For almost a week. Thomas looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. Clara felt suddenly calmer than she had since entering. Do you know what he asked from me in exchange? Thomas remained silent. Nothing. She looked at the altered agreement lying on the desk. You, however, seemed to want quite a lot. Prentice cleared his throat. Miss Bennett, regarding that document. Yes. She turned toward him. I never signed that paragraph. I'm aware you dispute it. I don't dispute it. I know it. Prentice removed several papers from his leather case. The complication is that your signature appears on the page. Clara examined the sheet. The paper looked right. The signature was hers. But the paragraph beneath had been added in slightly darker ink. She pointed. That line spacing is different. Prentice looked down. Clara continued. The agency form had a blank section beneath the signatures for witness information. Thomas's face changed. Very slightly. Clara saw it. So did Nathan. You added it there, she said. Thomas scoffed. That's absurd. No. Clara picked up the page. When I signed this in Illinois, the bottom half was nearly empty. Your memory after months. I kept books for 9 years. Thomas stopped. Nathan's eyes remained fixed on him. Clara laid the page flat. I remember documents. Prentice turned toward his client. Mr. Whitaker. Thomas ignored him. Clara noticed another sheet, a ranch sale record. Nathan's purchase. She picked it up. Thomas immediately said, That has nothing to do with this. which meant it did. Clara read the figures: sale price, date, outstanding mortgage. Then she found a notation in the margin, a lender's name, Charles Mercer. Clara looked up. Nathan saw it too. Mercer? Sheriff Pike stepped closer. Thomas's expression collapsed for half a second. Nathan took the paper. You owed Mercer? Thomas said nothing. Pike frowned. Charles told me you owed First Territorial Bank. I owed both. Nathan looked toward Clara. She understood at once. Mercer, the grain supplier, the polished boots, the man who had approached her in the mercantile with far too much interest in Nathan's accounts. Nathan's voice lowered. How much? Thomas looked away. Prentice answered. Mr. Mercer purchased several of Mr. Whitaker's private notes. Nathan's jaw tightened. Why? No one answered. Then the courthouse door opened. Charles Mercer walked inside. Clara almost admired the timing. Almost. He removed his gloves slowly. Because I expected Whitaker to repay them. Nathan stared at him. With what? Mercer glanced at Clara. That remains to be determined. Everything became clear. Not all at once, but enough. Clara stepped away from Thomas and faced Mercer. You knew I was keeping Nathan's books. Yes. You knew about the grain purchases. Eventually. You knew the ranch was improving. Mercer smiled faintly. You're talented with numbers. Nathan moved closer to Clara. Mercer continued. Cole purchased this place below market value. Because Whitaker's debts made it nearly worthless, Nathan said. Perhaps. Nathan held up the sale paper. You financed him. I loaned him money. And now? Mercer shrugged. I want repayment. Clara looked at the forged agreement again. You thought Thomas could use me to challenge Nathan's ownership. Mercer's smile disappeared. Thomas spoke quickly. That wasn't the plan. Clara turned toward him. Then what was? Thomas looked at Mercer. Too late. Nathan saw it. Sheriff Pike saw it. Prentice saw it. The lawyer slowly closed his case. Mr. Whitaker, he said, I believe there are facts here I was not given. Thomas looked suddenly pale. Mercer's voice sharpened. Careful, counselor. Prentice ignored him. He pointed toward Clara's agreement. I was told Miss Bennet had willingly signed this clause. She did. No, Clara said. Prentice studied Thomas. And I was told the ranch sale was disputed before Mr. Cole took possession. Nathan laughed once. That's a lie. The sheriff stepped toward Thomas. Is it? Thomas looked trapped now. The polished appearance had begun to crack. Clara saw the man beneath the letters. Not a villain. Something smaller. A coward. A man who borrowed money, lied when frightened, fled when cornered, and returned only when someone else offered him another escape. Thomas turned toward Clara. I can fix this. She almost pitied him. Almost. How? Come with me. Nathan became completely still. Thomas spoke faster. We can leave Wyoming. Clara stared at him. You still think this is about marriage? I can give you what I promised. With Mercer's money? Thomas flinched. I'll repay him. How? No answer. Nathan stepped forward. By taking the ranch back? Thomas looked at him. I owned it first. You sold it. I was desperate. So was she. Nathan pointed toward Clara. But she didn't forge anything. Thomas's face reddened. You think you're better than me? Nathan's response was immediate. No. Clara looked at him. Nathan continued. I think she deserved better than both of us deciding what she ought to do. The anger left Clara all at once. Thomas stared at him. Nathan looked toward Clara. And she gets to decide now. Silence filled the room. Every man looked at her. Thomas, Mercer, Prentice, Sheriff Pike, Nathan. Only one of them looked as though he genuinely expected nothing. Clara walked toward the desk. She picked up the agreement Thomas had altered, then tore it in half. Thomas stepped forward. You can't. She tore it again. Prentice did not stop her. That is a copy, he said calmly. Clara looked toward the sheriff. Good. Pike nodded. The original is already in my office. Thomas's face went white. Clara approached him. When I boarded that train, I believed I was traveling toward you. Her voice remained quiet. I wasn't. Thomas swallowed. I was traveling away from a life where I had no place of my own. She looked toward Nathan, and I happened to knock on the wrong door. Nathan's eyes met hers. Clara turned back to Thomas. It was the best mistake I ever made. Thomas looked as though she had struck him. Mercer scoffed. This sentimental nonsense doesn't settle the debt. Nathan faced him. No, but the sale deed does. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Nathan held up the document. You witnessed it. Clara looked closer. There it was. Charles Mercer's signature. Nathan continued. You signed as witness that Whitaker sold the ranch freely, without claim attached. Mercer's face hardened. Pike stepped toward him. And if you helped arrange a forged document afterward, I did no such thing. Then you won't mind answering questions. Mercer looked toward Thomas. Thomas immediately looked away. That was the moment Mercer knew he had lost control of him. Prentice picked up his hat. My representation of Mr. Whitaker ends here. Thomas stared. What? You misrepresented material facts. You already took my money. I'll send an accounting. Prentice walked toward the door. Then stopped beside Clara. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, this document would have faced serious challenge, even without evidence of alteration. Clara nodded. Thank you. He left. Sheriff Pike turned toward Thomas and Mercer. Both of you are coming with me. Mercer's voice rose. On what charge? For now, questions. Pike looked at Thomas. And depending on what those answers reveal, forgery and attempted fraud may follow. Thomas stared at Clara one final time. Clara. She said nothing. I did care about you. Perhaps he even believed it. That was the saddest part. Clara answered quietly. You cared about the life you imagined I could solve for you. Thomas's shoulders dropped. She looked toward Nathan. He had never asked her to solve his life. He had only made room inside it. Sheriff Pike escorted Thomas and Mercer out through the side entrance. The courthouse became silent. Clara stood beside the desk. Nathan remained several feet away. The anger had left him. Now he simply watched her. Well? She asked. Well, what? You threatened no one. Not successfully. Nathan. He smiled faintly. Clara walked toward him. It's over. For you? Yes? He studied her face. You sure? She nodded. I thought seeing Thomas again might make me question everything. And? It did. Nathan's expression tightened. Clara stepped closer. It made me question how I ever thought 6 letters could tell me who a man was. His eyes softened. She reached for his hand. The answer is they can't. Nathan looked down at their joined hands. Clara, you told me you wouldn't ask anything until I faced him. Yes, I faced him. Nathan swallowed. Outside, the courthouse bell struck 11. Clara waited. Nathan, apparently capable of repairing roofs, breaking horses, managing cattle, and confronting armed men, suddenly seemed unable to produce a sentence. Clara raised an eyebrow. Well? He cleared his throat. I had a better version of this planned. Did you? Yes. Was it happening sometime this century? Nathan laughed. Then, before courage deserted him again, he reached into his coat. Clara stopped breathing. He pulled out a small ring, not elaborate, a narrow silver band with a tiny blue stone. Clara stared at it. Where did you get that? Mrs. Miller. When? Yesterday. You bought a ring before Thomas arrived? I was optimistic. She looked up. You were terrified. That too. Nathan held the ring carefully between his fingers. I don't have a speech. Good. I don't know how to promise that nothing bad will happen. Then don't. I can promise I won't lie to you. Clara's eyes filled. Nathan continued. I can promise you'll always have your own money. A laugh broke through her tears. That is surprisingly romantic. I thought you'd like that part. I do. And I can promise that if you keep changing where I put the coffee, I'll complain about it for the next 50 years. Clara smiled. Anything else? Nathan's voice softened. I can promise the door will always open when you come home. That was the promise that broke her. Not wealth, not security, not cattle, not a ranch, a door. One that opened. One that did not belong to another family. One behind which she was not an extra chair. Nathan looked at her. Clara Bennett, would you marry a man who never sent for a bride? She laughed through her tears. Yes. Nathan blinked. That fast? You want me to reconsider? No. He pushed the ring onto her finger with hands that were suddenly less steady than hers. Clara looked at it, then at him. Nathan hesitated. Can I kiss you? She smiled. You're asking now? I'm trying to improve. Yes, Nathan. He touched her cheek. The kiss was gentle, almost cautious, as though both understood that some moments became important, precisely because no one rushed them. Clara placed one hand against his chest. Nathan drew her closer. When they finally separated, she rested her forehead against his. I should warn you. What? I intend to keep the accounts after we're married. I assumed. And the $5 a week. Nathan pulled back. You're charging your husband. I am not working for free. He stared at her, then laughed loudly enough that someone outside the courthouse turned to look through the window. Clara smiled. That sound had once made a lonely cabin feel like a home. Now it sounded like the beginning of one. They married 3 weeks later. Not because Nathan wanted to hurry, not because Clara was afraid he might change his mind, and certainly not because Red Creek needed another subject to gossip about. They married because winter was coming. The first snow had already touched the western mountains, and neither of them could think of a sensible reason to continue sleeping in separate buildings while pretending the ranch had not already become theirs. Mrs. Miller insisted Clara needed a proper dress. Clara disagreed. Mrs. Miller ignored her. By the morning of the wedding, nearly every respectable woman in Red Creek had somehow contributed something. Lace from Mrs. Dalton, pearl buttons from Edith Miller, a small bunch of late autumn flowers from the school teacher. Clara stood in the room above the general store, while Mrs. Dalton fastened the final button at the back of her cream-colored dress. You look terrified, the older woman said. Clara stared at herself in the mirror. I crossed 2,000 miles intending to marry a stranger. And? That was easier. Mrs. Dalton laughed. Because that stranger didn't matter yet. Clara looked down at the silver ring already on her finger. No, Thomas had been an idea. Nathan was real. That made everything more frightening. And infinitely better. Outside the small church, Nathan waited with Sheriff Pike. He wore a black coat Clara had repaired twice, before finally threatening to burn it, unless he bought another. The new one fit badly across his shoulders. He kept pulling at the collar. Pike watched him. You planning to run? Nathan looked at him. No. Good. Because Clara's got better aim than you. Nathan frowned. How do you know? She told my wife. That woman tells everybody everything. Which woman? Nathan considered the question. Apparently all of them. The church doors opened. Nathan stopped speaking. Clara appeared. For several seconds, the entire room disappeared for him. No sheriff, no preacher, no townspeople, no winter wind rattling the windows. Only Clara. She walked slowly down the aisle. Nathan looked exactly as he had the first evening she knocked on his door. Uncertain, speechless, completely unprepared. Clara smiled. When she reached him, she whispered, "You look frightened." "I am." "Good." Nathan almost laughed. The preacher began. Their vows were simple. Nathan promised honesty. Clara promised partnership. Neither promised a perfect life. They had both learned enough to know better. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan hesitated before kissing her. Clara raised one eyebrow. "You already asked permission once." A few people laughed. Nathan smiled, then kissed his wife. This time, he was considerably less cautious. The church erupted in applause. By sunset, they were back at the ranch. Clara stood on the porch, watching Nathan unload wedding gifts from the wagon. 3 blankets, a new kettle, 2 lamps, a pie that had somehow survived the journey, and, to Nathan's annoyance, a framed sign from Turner. Clara read it. "Coal House, knock at your own risk." Nathan stared at it. I'm burning that. It's charming. It's terrible. I'm putting it above the door. Clara. She carried it inside. Nathan followed. You're not serious. She climbed onto a chair. You married me. I'm beginning to understand the consequences. Hold the chair. He did, naturally. When the sign was finally hung, Clara stepped down. Nathan examined it. I hate it. You'll survive. I survived 7 years alone. And look how badly that went. Nathan wrapped an arm around her waist. Clara looked up. The house had changed again. There were curtains now. Her books occupied half the shelf. Nathan's ledgers had been moved into a new cabinet she had ordered from town. A second armchair stood beside the fireplace. 2 coats hung by the door. 2 coffee cups sat on the table. Clara leaned against him. Do you miss the quiet? Nathan thought about it. No. Not even a little? You talk a lot. That was not the question. He kissed the top of her head. No. Outside, the first real snow began. Soft flakes crossed the porch. Clara watched them settle across the yard. Nathan's arm tightened around her. You cold? No. You're shivering. I'm thinking. That's usually expensive. She elbowed him. Nathan grinned. Clara became serious. What happens to Thomas? The question had been waiting for days. Nathan's smile disappeared. Pike said he agreed to testify against Mercer. And? Forgery charge may be reduced. Will he go to prison? She may be. Clara stared at the snow. She expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt only sadness. Not for the marriage that never happened. For the man Thomas might have become if he had learned earlier that failure was easier to survive than dishonesty. Nathan seemed to understand. You feel sorry for him? A little. That bother you? No. Clara looked at him. I just don't hate him anymore. Nathan nodded. That sounds easier. It is. Mercer's situation was worse. Sheriff Pike had uncovered evidence that he had purchased struggling ranchers' debts for years, then pressured them into selling land below market value. Thomas had not been his only victim. The investigation would continue through winter. Nathan's ownership of the ranch, however, was secure. Completely secure. Clara had checked the documents herself. Twice. Nathan had caught her the second time. You don't trust Pike? I trust paper more. You married me. That is different. How? I checked your accounts first. Nathan had laughed for nearly a minute. By December, Clara no longer worked for Nathan. At least, not technically. They became partners. Her suggestion, Nathan's immediate agreement. The ranch accounts were rewritten under both names, Nathan and Clara Cole. The first time Clara saw it, she touched the ink with one fingertip. Her name, not beneath a husband's, beside his. The western barn filled with grain purchased before winter prices rose. They sold 6 older cattle and used the money to repair the north fence. Clara began sewing for women in Red Creek twice a month. Nathan complained that the house became too quiet on those days. She accused him of becoming sentimental. He denied it, poorly. By January, Red Creek had stopped referring to Clara as Whitaker's mail-order bride. She became Mrs. Cole, then simply Clara. That mattered more. One bitter evening, Nathan entered the cabin covered in snow. Clara looked up from the ledger. You're late. Cow got through the south fence. Again? Yes. The fence I told you to replace? Nathan removed his gloves. That one. Clara stared at him. He raised both hands. You were right. She slowly closed the ledger. Say it again. No. Nathan. I said it once. I would like to preserve the memory. He walked toward her. Clara stood. You need dry clothes. In a minute. You're dripping on my floor. She paused. Nathan smiled. Our floor. Clara pretended to consider. That does make the water slightly less offensive. He pulled her gently toward him. She touched his frozen cheek. You're cold. I know. You'll catch pneumonia. You sound like a wife. I am your wife. Nathan looked at her as though the fact still surprised him. Sometimes it surprised Clara too. Then his gaze shifted toward the window. Snow covered the road, the same road Clara had once planned to walk back toward Red Creek, carrying one suitcase and $6. You know, Nathan said, if that bridge hadn't washed out, I know, you would have left the next morning. Probably. Nathan frowned. Probably? Clara smiled. I might have stayed for the biscuits. My biscuits? No. Cruel woman. She laughed. Nathan kissed her. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slowly, exposing brown grass beneath. The creek swelled again, but Nathan had rebuilt the bridge higher and stronger. Clara watched him work on it for 3 days. On the 4th, she brought lunch. Nathan sat beside the creek, boots muddy, sleeves rolled. She handed him a sandwich. You missed a support beam. He stared at her. I did not. Clara pointed. Nathan looked, then sighed. You're enjoying this. Deeply. He ate in silence. Clara sat beside him. The water moved beneath the new bridge. 1 year earlier, she had been sewing dresses in Illinois, a guest in her sister's home, waiting for life to begin. Now she owned half a ranch, half a bridge, and, according to Nathan, considerably more than half the opinions. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. Nathan looked down. You all right? Yes. You're quiet. So are you. I'm always quiet. Not anymore. He smiled. That was true. A wagon appeared on the distant road. Clara watched it approach. For one irrational second, she remembered another wagon disappearing into the Wyoming dusk. A suitcase beside her feet, a letter in her hand, a cabin ahead. Then the wagon passed. The memory passed with it. Nathan followed her gaze. What? Nothing. Clara stood. She brushed dust from her skirt. Nathan rose beside her. They walked back toward the house. The porch had been enlarged during winter. Rose grazed beyond the fence. 2 new calves stood beside their mothers. Smoke curled from the chimney. Clara stopped halfway across the yard. Nathan turned. What is it? She looked at the cabin. The first day I came here. Yes? You told me I had the wrong ranch. Nathan smiled. You did. Clara looked at him. No. He raised an eyebrow. She slipped her hand into his. I think I finally found the right one. Nathan's expression softened. Then he nodded toward the porch. The door's open. Clara looked. It was. Nathan had developed a habit of leaving it that way when he knew she was outside. Not wide, just enough. An invitation. A promise without words. Clara squeezed his hand. Together, they walked home, and the door never closed between them again.